Hi, my name is Matt. I love Legacy. I love spreadsheets. I love data. So I spent literally all day yesterday just going through all of the results from Eternal Weekend North America, watching how things were unfolding, looking at all of the information. So I've compiled all of the match results into a spreadsheet so that we can go through and look at the results together and I can sort of break down and I'll add thoughts if I have any, sort of like break them down. I haven't been around as much recently in terms of making videos or anything. Last time I made a video was in July, I think. It's been a minute. There's been a lot of stuff going on with me. I'll touch on that sort of at the end of the video, but for now, let's look at these. Let's look at the data. So Eternal Weekend North America just took place. There were 1,155 players. The top of the metagame broke down as such, with a roughly 18% of the field being on Dimir Reanimator. That's the sort of like the new version of the Dimir Riscaminator deck after Grief got banned. The next most played deck was Dimir Tempo, which uses a lot of the same shell, but without any of the combo element. Then we had Moon Stompy taking up 10% of the field, Eldrazi Stompy at 7%, along with Painter at 7%. Bant Nadu was 6% of the field, followed by Cephalid Breakfast at 5%. Notably, the differences between Bant Nadu and Cephalid Breakfast being that Bant Nadu doesn't have the Thassa's Oracle self mill kind of one turn kill, but will often have other ways of going sort of infinite ish or arbitrarily large, I guess you could say. Cephalid Breakfast is the classic Thassa's Oracle combo deck. Then we had Mystic Forge combo at 4%, JSky Control at 4%, and Doomsday at 4% of the field, along with D&T. Sneak and Show, Stifle Knot, Reanimator. Reanimator I classified as basically anything that wasn't a blue-black tempo shell with a Reanimator package, so this could be anything from World Gorger to Tin Fins to red-black Reanimator. Then we've got Cradle Control, lands, and then the rest of the field all combined to be 7% of the remaining field. The top 8 was pretty skewed. So we had 3 Mystic Forge combo decks, including 2 players from the General Toronto area, folks that my community is really excited, did really well. Kelvin Wallace and Joshua Kronk. Kelvin ended up taking down the tournament, so congrats to him. And then we had Cephalid Breakfast, Death and Taxes, Dimir Reanimator, Painter, and Bant Nadu. So you could really say that Mystic Forge was the card of the tournament, or maybe it was the Eldrazi Fleshrakers. Let's take a look at each of the sort of big decks, how they performed overall. So we can look at the top 8, but there's going to be a ton of folks who just look at top 8 results or top 16 results, whereas I spent an entire day yesterday scraping results and putting them into spreadsheets so that I could see how each deck fared against each other deck. So that's really where I like to come at this. So Dimir Reanimator already sort of specified roughly its metagame percentage. That was 168 copies played. It put almost 3% of its pilots into an X2 or better bracket, which is an overperformance relative to the field. It put about 10% of its players into X3 or better, which is pretty good as well. Its win rates were overall pretty good. So 53% is against anything that wasn't a mirror match, obviously excluding draws and buys. That's a solid result. Obviously, it had a 50-50 win rate in the mirror. It was very slightly positive in against Dimir Tempo, but it's basically a 50-50. Went pretty positive against Moon Stompy, winning 64 to 31 matches. And then it had poor matchups against Eldrazi Stompy, Painter, Bant Nadu, Cephalid Breakfast, and Mystic Forge. So you can really see that this is a field where Dimir Reanimator was sort of the deck to beat going in. And so it and Dimir Tempo, which are very similar decks, albeit attacking on slightly different axes, were relatively even, and then it beat up on Moonstompy a lot, but then a lot of the other top decks were really gunning for it. So that's something to consider. Maybe why it didn't do as well as it might have been expected. Notably, really bad against Mystic Forge combo, only winning roughly a quarter of its games. It did do well against JSky Control and Doomsday. The dynamics of being a fast, like being able to play a tempo game and a combo game while applying pressure against Doomsday, very strong. Same against JSky Control. If we move on to Demir Tempo, we see again it did about 50-50 against Demir Reanimator. It took up about 9% of the field with 104 copies played. It didn't put a great number of players into the X2 or better bracket, but it did put an above average number of players into the X3 or better bracket. Overall, it had just barely above a 50% win rate. It had strong matchups against Moon Stompy and against Cephalid Breakfast and Eldrazi Stompy, but it didn't do well against Painter, Nadu, or JSky Control. It did seem to have a pretty middling match against Mystic Forge, which ended up being the deck to beat for this tournament. So that's something to be aware of. Moon Stompy. So Moon Stompy did not do well. Oh, poor Moon Stompy. So Moon Stompy got played at was about 8% of the field, 92 copies played, didn't put any pilots into X2 or better, only put 4.33% into X3 or better. It looks like it had a slightly negative overall win rate. Didn't do well against Demir Reanimator, Demir Tempo, Mystic Forge combo, or Doomsday. And then it had a pretty good matchup against the Eldrazi Stompy decks. It seemed to have done well against Painter, Bant Nadu, and Cephalid Breakfast. And you'll see this as a trend, but basically everything beat up on JSky Control. JSky Control was somehow one of the top 10 most played decks, but just did abysmally. Eldrazi Stompy was sort of the other ancient tomb aggro deck to in the tournament. We had about 6% of the field, 70 copies, underperformed into the X2 bracket with roughly 1.5% of its pilots making it there, but overperformed into the X3 bracket, putting 11.5%. Had a slightly positive win rate overall. Went slightly favored against Demir Reanimator, but did not go didn't go positive against Demir Tempo, Moon Stompy, Painter, or Mystic Forge. Notably, really bad against Moon Stompy, Painter, and Mystic Forge. Like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I'm kind of reacting to this data live. I spent so long just crunching all the numbers, but I haven't actually really taken the time to process it. And I just wanted to share all of this information with everybody as quickly as possible. So forgive me for that. Looks like it did really well against Bant Nadu, Cephalid Breakfast, JSky Control, and did pretty well against Doomsday. This is a deck that when I'm playing against it with a fair deck, I feel reasonably solid against, and then as an unfair deck, they just have so much pressure, and the lock pieces are hard to deal with at the same time as pressure that this all makes sense to me. Next up, we have Painter. So Painter, just as a quick aside, Painter is a deck that often we see doing well the less healthy a metagame is. And I'm not really sure what that corollary is, like why that's the case, but that is something that I found when I've been looking back at past unhealthy metagames. So just something to keep in mind, I guess. Overall, it had 5.5% of the field, 64 copies played, overperformed into X2 and X3, just under a 53% total win rate, beating up on Demir Reanimator, Demir Tempo. It's good against both of those decks, so as long as it can disrupt Demir Reanimator, it plays a really good grind game. Didn't do well against Moon Stompy, did do well against Eldrazi Stompy. A big, like, really funny interaction here is that Painter Servant means that all things have a color once it's in play, and then the Eldrazi creatures all require themselves to be colorless in order to take advantage of their lands. Obviously had a 50-50 in the mirror, slightly favored against the Bant Nadu decks and Cephalid Breakfast. Very poor matchup against Mystic Forge combo, crushed JSky Control, and then didn't do great against Doomsday. We've got Bant Nadu now. Bant Nadu was just under 5% of the field, 57 copies played, overperformed into X2 by a little bit, and then really heavily overperformed into X3. Had a slightly favorable win rate overall, just under 53%. Had a 55, 56% win rate against Demir Reanimator, 67, won two-thirds of his matches against Demir Tempo. That's pretty impressive. And then went negative against Moon Stompy, Eldrazi Stompy, and Painter. So it looks like this is a deck that doesn't do well against the Ancient Tomb decks. We see that as well with the Mystic Forge combo being negative. And then Doomsday being a fast combo deck looks like it was also pretty good, but that's a much smaller sample size. Something to keep in mind as we go down these sort of like rankings of what was the most played decks is that the sample sizes get smaller, and so there's less. We can't rely on that data quite as much. Looks like it went even in the mirror, well, the pseudo mirror. So both in the actual mirror and then the pseudo mirror of Cephalid Breakfast. So they're different decks, but they have quite a bit of overlap in terms of the way that they can actually execute the game. This is a deck that I would love to play at some point. I don't have any natural orders at the moment, so that would be something that I would need. Moving on to Cephalid Breakfast. So Cephalid Breakfast, 4% of the field, 48 copies played, underperformed into X2 or better, overperformed into X3, 52% overall win rate, went relatively favored against Demir Reanimator, 60%, just under 60% win rate. Lost out to Demir Tempo, Moon Stompy, Eldrazi Stompy, and Painter. Sort of the same thing as what I was saying earlier, is that the Ancient Tomb decks with the lock pieces tend to be pretty good against these more fragile combo decks. And so Cephalid Breakfast is a more fragile combo deck than Bant Nadu is, as the individual components of the deck are not quite as they don't do as much on their own. Like Cephalid Illusionist is not the same as Nadu. And then the dorky one drops like the Shukos are not the same as playing like uh, Noble Hierarchs and stuff. Looks like it also went negative against Mystic Forge and then beat up on JSky Control and Doomsday. So something that we see here, and I've played quite a bit of Cephalid Breakfast, is that it tends to feel very good in sort of like combo mirrors. So it has the ability to win with a total of 3 mana, and not just like win as in put an Atraxa into play or something, but win as in like actually truly end the game. And so it only necessarily needs like one or two pieces of interaction and to be able to just jam sometimes. And so this is probably why we see it doing quite well against Doomsday and against the Demir Reanimator decks. And then everything beat up on Jeskai Control. So who knows? Who knows there? Mystic Forge combo. This was the deck of the tournament. So Mystic Forge combo put 3 players into top 8, which is pretty wild. It was just about 3.5% of the field with 40 copies played. It performed really really well. So 12.5% of the 40 players made it into X2, which is a very good result. Nearly a third of all of the Mystic Forge players made it into X3 or better. I think that there were a bunch of Toronto players who did that. So if you're listening, other Legacy of the North folks, like congrats. Um, it had a staggering 62% win rate, excluding the mirror, which is absolutely nuts. 72.5% win rate against Demir Reanimator, which is also nuts considering Demir Reanimator was the deck to beat, may not be now. Went 50-50 against Demir Tempo. I'm curious what the differentiating factor between the Tempo and Reanimator versions of Demir are here. But this is a deck that I've never picked this deck up and played it, so I'm not 100% sure, and I've only played against it a few times, not a lot of times. Um, it seems to have crushed pretty much everything that wasn't Jeskai Control and Doomsday. So against Jeskai, I guess like I have a lot of experience with Jeskai. This deck is not super difficult to disrupt if you have an abundance of answers and some lock pieces. So if you're playing things like, say, Deafening Silence, and you've got counter spells and you have removal, the deck really relies on getting an engine into play. So a Mystic Forge, a Fleshraker, One Ring, one of those 3 components really, really critical to resolve. And then the deck can rebuild from very few resources and apply a ton of pressure. So JSky Control being able to interact on all of those axes makes sense. And then Doomsday, kind of like with Cephalid Breakfast, I would have expected to do well here. Doomsday is a deck that is typically capable of, you know, having a little bit of interaction and then doing an extremely quick kill. I am interested to see why Cephalid Breakfast didn't do well here, but Doomsday did. That's kind of interesting to me. But this is definitely a deck to watch. It clearly put up a crazy result. I think that one other component here is that it's not necessarily as easy to hate out as you might think. So it's a deck that is obviously made up of a lot of artifacts, and so things like a Null Rod you would expect to be good, but Glaring Fleshraker makes this really different in that it provides a mana source that doesn't require tapping an artifact. So you need to be able to attack the glaring fleshraker angle of their mana engine in order to be able to actually disrupt and attack that deck. Let's take a look at JSky Control. So, oh man, this makes me so sad. I love JSky Control, and it is so bad. So bad. Oh my god. All right, so JSky Control, just under 3.5% of the field, 39 copies, put no pilots into X2 or better, only put 2.5% of its pilots into X3 or better. So that means that most of these pilots ended at X4 or worse. That's not great. Had a win rate of 42%, 42.5%. Let's not forget the half a percent there. It went negative against Dimir Reanimator. It went positive against Dimir Tempo. This makes sense to me. So it it often will fall behind super early in the game and then is able to outcard longer in the game. Dimir Tempo not being a deck that has it doesn't have the ability to like close the game super quickly the way that say something like Delver would or Dimir Reanimator. It's all of its threats are vulnerable to the removal spells that Jeskai's playing. So that makes sense to me. Moon Stompy, it crushed Jeskai Control. Eldrazi Stompy crushed Jeskai Control. Painter crushed Jeskai Control. Bant Nadu crushed it. Cephalid Breakfast, and Doomsday. And then I talked a little bit about the Mystic Forge combo Jeskai matchup earlier. Again, this is a small sample size, so it could also just be a matter of like, maybe the Jeskai players, because they were all in the losers bracket, only played against the inexperienced Mystic Forge combo players. Hard to say for sure. That is data that I could probably have access to. I just haven't had a chance to look at it yet. So that makes sense. Moral of the story here is unless you are okay with losing, don't play Jeskai. Oh no. And closing at our top 10 most played decks, we have Doomsday. Doomsday did pretty well. I've really been liking the Doomsday lists with Psychic Frog. I think it's a really cool combination here. It was just over 3% of the field, 37 copies played, 2.7% into X2 or better, and almost 11% into X3. Had an overall positive win rate, 53% against the field, but lost out against a lot of the top decks. So you can see negative against Dimir Reanimator and Dimir Tempo, very positive against Moon Stompy, but slightly negative against Eldrazi and Painter. Went pretty positive against Bant Nadu, went negative against Cephalid Breakfast, went positive against Mystic Forge, positive against Jeskai Control, and then mirror match of Doomsday. So this has been sort of a So hopefully that was cool and useful information to look at and absorb. I've got more data. I will post the data sheets in the description so that if anyone wants to delve into it on a more granular level, feel free. Um, it took me quite a while to do this, so thanks for spending the time going through these results with me here. Um, I don't know if I am planning on continuing to make like legacy content or videos. I'll sort of see. It was something that like I was really enjoying during the winter last year into the spring as something that I could do when it was cold outside. Um, and I haven't been around as much for the last like 6-ish months. My my father, unfortunately, he passed away. It was really sudden. He got the double cancer diagnosis, like two separate terminal cancers at the same time. And so from the time that we found out to the time that he passed away was only like 8 months or something. Um, so I've been really like reevaluating a lot of the stuff sort of in my life and the the time that is important to spend with my friends and my family, and sort of like what I want to be doing. But I continued to make videos because throughout the end of his life, he enjoyed watching some of the videos that I had made because it when I wasn't physically present, when I wasn't visiting him in the hospital or anything, he was able to still feel connected, and that was really meaningful to me. And it's been really meaningful to have all of the folks who have watched and sort of seen all of the stuff that I've created, and like, yeah, it's been really nice. Obviously hard, but nice. So that's sort of like a little bit of context. I don't know sort of what my plan going forward is, but you may see me, you may not. We'll sort of see how life unfolds. Um, and if you if you haven't, go to the doctor, get yourself screened, because yeah, you never know. You never know. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you have a good rest of your day.